What's up? Boy Shrimp, Boy Savage, recording live. YouTube and BitChute, watch out. Here I come. Let's continue. Minus the shitty punnies. Today, Boy Savage takes on Noam Chomsky's Turn to Capitalism, Episode 1. This episode, I'm not going to take on the guy yet, although I do disagree with mutualism, because mutualism tends to, since the general left, so to speak, since general left tend to use such terminology, such non-arguments as nature's coercive. It's not, because it's not a person. You got to be a person. You got to have the criteria of a person or a higher thinking animal. The only animals that have that are the primates, the great ape, the big apes, and humans, who, according to evolutionary biology, we are related to. In some ways, I question that because of our capacity for extreme stupidity. Then again, it gets reassured when I see that chimpanzees have recently hit the Stone Age, which they have, by the way, people. Believe that shit. Incredible, amazing time in history. When you ignore the shitty elements of the world for 2 minutes and actually read about it. It's interesting. Chimpanzees are in the Stone Age. But, well, as I was saying, well, you have to be able to have the criteria to do what we consider thinking, which is a process of certain brains that have a certain stage of development, which we have hit that certain level, like chimpanzees hit Stone Age, the very beginnings of that. Various other apes have that ability to some degree. Although, what's the limit? What's the minimum? I don't think they've quite hit that minimum yet. We are able to easily hit that minimum requirement. Well, we have to be able to think. We have to be able to have the sense of free will, which is a byproduct of the natural sciences taking place, leading, our highly developed brains and other things like that. I think, personally, I've read, you gotta have some sense of individuality, so and choose, sense of free will, in order to choose to do something of that nature. And nature is not a person. Nature cannot fill that role. Nature is just something a person just happens to come from. You have to have the ability to think, what we perceive as thinking, which you can easily argue is one of our main instincts, which is socializing, cooperation, competition, intelligence, and adapting. And those other primary instinct traits that got us biologically listed as super predators. And also finding intrinsic value in things is another part of our hardwire. One of our more hardwired instincts. But the thing is, you have to have certain criteria of thinking and processing and doing, do basically what humans do as our primary instincts, essentially. And you have to think on that and not care about, be able to choose to do the said things. That's what kind of makes a coercer. That's the role of a coercer. So the ability to coerce has to be based on these factors. Has to be based upon these things. Humans are the only ones I can definitely tell you what fit that criteria. Nature is just what we come from. Nature's not a person. It's that fucking simple. Most people tend to be stupid when it comes to this argument. I was too at one point. I was a Marx sympathizer. I read Das Kapital and Manifesto, several little bits and pieces of it over time, few years back. 5-6 years ago, whenever I first stumbled upon it the first time. Don't remember much because I'm going back into reading them again, but right now I started with State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. And then you have the definitions they use for capitalism, which is built upon conflation fallacies, which I'll get into soon enough. And then you have co-opting of terminology such as personal property. Let me explain it bluntly. Personal property is just private property that you can carry. This has my name on it, it's personal property. If this has my name on it, it's personal property. Put my name on it, personal property. Personal property. Personal property, personal property, personal property. Private property. The walling, this house, the yard it sits on. Private property. It's not portable. Personal property, private property. Makes sense? A real estate agent can tell you this shit. Let's just say I've encountered a few in my time. I got a friend who's also a more recent subscriber known as Tom. He is a very brilliant-minded individual. Man, I say a bundle of laughs and a fucking sweetheart as a person, and actually as an economic education. There's a bunch of other conflation and I would almost say separationist fallacy or co-opt fallacy. If you were to make a new fallacy, term co-opting and separationist and fallacy, or just co-opting fallacy could be added in the list of logical fallacies if you were to do something like that. But hey, that's why we 19th century liberals call ourselves libertarians since the 50s. Thanks to Mr. Leonard Reed, founder of the Federation of Economic Education, and Murray Rothbard. Since the term was being co-opted at multiple times during the fucking fuckhead Roosevelt era, FDR. And there's other arguments I can go on and on from there. But let's get to what do I have to say positivity oriented about the great professor and cognitive scientist and contributor to so many fucking things. As a cognitive scientist, philosopher of the mind, philosopher of science, philosopher of language, and a philosopher of logic. All these things. What do I have to say about the man? Well, to put it simply, he's contributed, like I said, I just listed these: linguistics, philosophy of science, philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, philosophy of, I believe philosophy of logic too, if I'm not mistaken, cognitive science, political criticisms, his good contributions to contemporary Western and analytic philosophies. These will always be appreciated. Chomsky's work contributed substantially to the decline of behaviorist psychology. In addition, some arguments in evolutionary psychology are derived from his research. Noam Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, a chimpanzee who was a subject of a study in animal language acquisition in Columbia University, was named after Noam Chomsky himself, in reference to his view of language acquisition as a uniquely human ability. the 1984 Nobel Prize laureate in medicine and physiology, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name. I can type his name in the description below. Used Chomsky's generative model to explain the human immune system, equating the components of a generative grammar with various structures of proteins structures, titled of germs or germs, whatever. Stockholm Nobel lecture was the generative grammar of the immune system. His theory of generative grammar has also carried over into music theory and analysis. An MIT press release found that Chomsky was cited within the Arts and Humanities Citation Index more than any other living scholar on Earth from 1980 to 92. Hey, that's when I was born. Despite their respect for his intellectual contribution, a number of linguists and philosophers have very critical of Chomsky's approach to language. These critics include Christina Bemme, or whatever the fuck, Rudolph Botha, whatever, Vivian Evans, Daniel Everett, Chris Knight, Bruce Nevin, and Michael Tomasello. Sorry if I mispronounced these with my occasional bouts of illiteracy. I apologize. Chomsky's approach to academic freedom has led him to give support to MIT academics whose actions he deplores. In 1969, Chomsky heard what Walt Rostow, whatever, a major architect of the Vietnam War, wanted to return to work at MIT. Chomsky threatened to protest publicly if the individual was denied a position at MIT. Then in 1989, 20 years later, when Pentagon advisor John Deutsch, wanted to be the president of MIT, Chomsky supported his candidacy. Later, when that other man became head of the CIA, the New York Times quoted Chomsky as saying, "He has more honesty and integrity than anyone I have ever met. If somebody's got to be running the CIA, I'm glad it's him." And he has been cited in 40 to 50 something fucking head universities and honorary doctorates and so many fucking degrees and honorary degrees as awards for his contributions to the sciences and language and so much, and in his greatness. It's amazing what he's done. Here's the views besides all these contributions to the world he's done, here are some views I agree with straight up. In some areas I have differences in where we agree with and disagree in these areas, some of these, but for the most part we agree. I would agree with him. He thinks the truth about political realities is systemically distorted or suppressed through elite corporate interests. No fucking shit. That they use state protectionism for that, of course. And who use corporate media, advertising, and think tanks to promote their own propaganda. Well, of course. His work seeks to reveal such manipulations and truth that they obscure. This is referenced in Wolfgang B. Sperlich. Sorry if I mispronounced that. It's a 2006 book, Noam Chomsky, in London, England. Reaction Books, page 158. His views that common sense is all that's required to break through the web of falsehood to see the truth. If it, and by it we mean common sense, is employed or paired with using critical thinking skills and awareness that the role of self-interest and deception plays on oneself and others around them. But in my view, I say the more darker side of self-interest, where it starts devolving from self-interest into actual greed, at the expense of others and wanting excess, when really self-interest is just wanting something for your own personal advantage or survival or gain. When the other is wanting excess for yourself at the expense of others. When you go to the darker side of self-interest. It's about to devolve into the other, which is what we would call that definition of greed. Mm, mm, mm. I could say that would be more of a factor. I would opine but I don't disagree with them nonetheless in that regard. It's also mentioned in the same book. He believes that it is the moral responsibility. Honestly, I would replace moral with ethical, and we would 100% agree with it, of intellectuals to tell the truth about the world, but claims that if you do so because of their fear of losing prestige and funding. Said being referred in James McGilvray's 2014 book, Chomsky, Language, Mind, and Politics, the second edition, Cambridge University. Page 159. The fourth thing I agree with him on is Chomsky's highlighting that since the 1970s, the U.S. becoming increasingly economically unequal as a result of the repeal of various financial regulations and the rescinding of the Bretton Woods financial control agreements, is referred to in the McGilvray's 2014 book, page 14. This one in particular is because of corporatization of politics and economics in and of itself. And the Bretton Woods control agreement being rescinded, being the death of the best currency model we've ever had, I would say, known as the gold standard when it comes to economics. Fiat money it's terrible, but it still has a use. That's why we're using it, because it still has a use. And the thing is, I would advocate gold, osmium, and gold and osmium and ruthenium and silver-backed currencies. Sorry. I would bring that system back, but use multiple precious metals that we have good uses for, but don't tend to use them for as much. Basically, anything anything in the platinum group that's outside of iridium, rhodium, platinum, and palladium. So wait a minute, that would be osmium and that would be it's okay. That would be only two left. Would be osmium and ruthenium. They're not widely used, but they're very valuable. And silver is useful if it's plated with something to make great conductive wire like graphene. But anyway, let's move on. And but the thing is, you would have to bring that back. I would ideally say, you have to decentralize a lot of structures. You would have to decorporate. You must remove corporatization of shit before considering deregulation. Or do both at the same time if that is the course of action that's the most logical. As long as it removes state control and can kill off state monopoly capitalism. I'll get into that soon enough. Just gave you a spoiler. 5. The fifth thing we both agree on is, although acknowledging that corporate domination of media and government stifle any significant change in the system at time, he sees reason for optimism, citing the historical examples of the social rejection of slavery as immoral or unethical. Well, technically, yeah. To some extent, that's true, but also, if you want to go further into depth about it, you recommend Redneck Manifesto by Jim Goad, historical records of the traction engine, the thresh machines, and cotton gin, their developments, Walter E. Williams and learning about the global, the geopolitical atmosphere of that era, based on the best records possible. Walter E. Williams for more, and Thomas Sowell as well. Black rednecks and white liberals can help to contribute to that, analysis, using facts. More info, and going back to the earliest eras of slavery, a lot of people, if you're Eurocentric or if you're Afrocentric as a historian, you're both fucking retarded, because both ancient Africa and ancient Europe and ancient Asia all practiced chattel slavery. If not directly calling it that, it was some form of it, and they also used forced chained labor violent forced labor, etc., etc. Slavery. Oh, it's still slavery. Indentured servitude can devolve into slavery when it comes to treatment of the indentured servants. It's not that much better. Net result, treatment and other factors could be just about it's just the same really in the long run. Can be so. You get these different things. And the actual history, geopolitical atmosphere to actually, and then learn about the books, The Real Abraham Lincoln by Thomas D. Lorenzo. The Real Lincoln by Thomas D. Lorenzo and George M. Frederickson's Big Enough to Be Inconsistent. Abraham Lincoln Confronts Slavery and Race. Those are the two final books on how to go into further detail about my views on slavery. My views on the whole using slavery argument is what I mean. Not my views on it. I think it's abhorrent, but what I know, I wouldn't use it as so effortlessly like Professor Chomsky does. There's a lot other context to it, and people just used each other as a mere, slavery was an economic system, was dying due to industrialization. So and then when the idea of natural law was more modernized due to Locke and the classical economists and various others, along that time and in the founding fathers. After that's when it started, and then when industrialization became widespread, Europeans started using, were the first to end slavery, especially the UK. It's a whole fucking different story. But anyway, that's why I would recommend these suggestions for more accurate, detailing of the history of slavery. That's why I'm okay with using it though, but the social rejection of it was bound to happen regardless. It would have happened sooner if it wasn't for certain governmental plantation, owners, pressures and shit on the Confederate States making it go, doing a Turk Majerbs propaganda, essentially. His use of his using the advances of women's rights. I agree with these, except for the Scum Manifesto, women having the legal power to trap guys into pregnancies, paternity fraud, false allegations actually being able to ruin a man, the MGTOW coming into existence and growing fast as a consequence of women with feministic, left-leaning mindsets ruining things between the sexes. Am basically living their lifestyle to protect myself from the bullshit, etc., 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 because I accept the statistics and the evidence to prove this? And then going back in history, when I learned about the first woman of America, if the Assimilation and Naturalization Acts in the 1790 were not passed to restrict it to just only white men, and if social taboos around women of sex and colors and whatnot were removed, and women of all the types were allowed to, would be allowed to work if they, and pay, be able to vote if they work, pay taxes, and own property just like men did. If those Naturalization Assimilation Acts of 1790 didn't come in, more women would have come about. Not that many, but more of them would have popped up, and feminism would not necessarily had to have come along. If you count all these factors in, technically I would somewhat semi-agree with it. But the way it came about was just, it has so many costs to it. And then the Christian women's temperance movement being paid by Rockefeller and others to petition to ban the stills, get rid of that evil thing, which did nothing on people's drinking, and it was more so of a duping of the public to sell a kerosene or coal oil byproduct we call gasoline. And other than that, not all that criticism to that, I somewhat agree, because women and men, I have no problem having equal rights under the law. It's when people abuse the shit under the label of equality is where my problem starts. And the forcing a government to justify invasions to illustrate how change is possible. everything else besides these criticisms, I agree with this fifth one. 6. Chomsky considers most conspiracy theories to be fruitless. I agree. Very few. I think 99.97% of them are all fucking falsehoods and nonsense and batshit insanities. There's 0.03% of them have some grounding in objective truth to some extent. Well, anyways, he considers it to be fruitless, distracting substitutes to thinking about policy formation in an institutional framework where individual manipulation is secondary to broader social imperatives. He does not dismiss conspiracy theories outright. I do, because like I said, 99.97% of them fuck bullshit. But he does consider them unproductive to challenging power. This is something we hugely agree on. Chomsky has replied that it is very rational for the media to manipulate. Anyways, a lot of people have considered him his own thoughts as conspiracy theories, but Chomsky has said it is very rational for the media to manipulate information in order to sell it, like any other business. Then he asked what General Motors would do, would use or discard to sell their products, which is referred to Ryan Milan's, I hope I said that right, 1995 book, Chomsky's Politics. And the other points were mentioned in McGillivray's book, pages 14. And Chomsky's Language, Mind, Politics, and other books of the like, and Milan's book. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. That whole name, actually. The 1995 book, Chomsky's Politics. Chomsky views postmodernism being an instrument of power. I wholeheartedly agree with. That's an interesting parallel between him and Peterson and many of us out there. I also agree with Professor Chomsky's discussion about how if we applied the Nuremberg principles, most if not all the post-war presidents would be screwed or punished for their criminalities and corruption. They'd be getting fucked right now. For good measure, for good reason. 9. Using empirical data and decently justified theories to make an ideal society. That's what he advocates. But my agreement with him, I would say not necessarily utopia, but the closest thing that is realistic, possible, that is realistic and is prone to starting and restarting or and improving or changing and improving and evolving as things come up in its way, to allow natural evolution and progression over time is something. That's my take on his view of that. That's the parallel I have. I agree with it, but that's what my take on that would be instead. So you get me how I praise the man. I hope you enjoy my discussing about what I like about Professor Chomsky. The contributions to society, the things I strongly agree with him on, the parts I disagree with or would factor other pieces in before using the same justifications as he would, etc., etc. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'm sorry if it was long-winded as fuck, but that's me. I have a lot to say. See you in episode 2. West takes on Chomsky's Turn to Capitalism, quote unquote, part 1.